Welcome back to the Mind Hive podcast, everyone. This is episode 2, where I interview Justin Foster. Now, Justin is a mental performance specialist. He's worked with Olympians, NFL players, and most notably, Air Force fighter pilots. And so we're going to get into some of that, as well as how Justin came to become a mental performance specialist. And so this is a really exciting conversation because it revealed what it takes to succeed at the highest level in several different domains, whether it's sports or the military or business. And we wrap it up by talking about some practical takeaways that any of you might be able to use just in your daily lives, not necessarily as Olympians. I know many of you probably aren't Olympians, or some sort of equivalent in another domain. So we're just going to talk about at the end, what can everyday people really take away and learn from this field of mental performance training. I hope you enjoy.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to talk about some of this stuff, man. Since I talked to Dallas afterwards, he was like, yeah, man, you should talk to this guy I know named Justin. And he was like, yeah, he trained some Air Force fighter pilots. And I'm just like, oh, yes, I need to interview him. Give me his contact information. Yeah.
Those guys are awesome. I love those guys.
Well, we'll dive into it. I guess I'll just start by reading off your bio, man. So for everybody listening in, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Justin Foster. Justin is a respected mental performance coach and owner of the Excelling Edge, which is an organization committed to cultivating excellence in high achievers. Over the past 12 years, Justin has specialized in sport and performance psychology, helping individuals and teams perform at their peak. In 2020, he began working with the U.S. Air Force, focusing on training fighter pilots. As part of an integrated human performance team, he developed cognitive performance training programs and conducted neurocognitive assessments, significantly enhancing pilots' perception, decision-making, and execution skills. At the Excelling Edge, Justin uses his expertise to assist individuals and organizations to overcome obstacles, flourish under pressure, and attain their highest potential. His clientele includes military personnel, business owners, and athletes from various sports, all of whom have greatly benefited from his knowledge and experience. Justin currently lives in Phoenix, Arizona, with his wife and daughter. Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot, Colin. It's great to be here.
I want to start off kind of, maybe this isn't the beginning of the story, so you can let me know where you think the story needs to begin. But I know in 2010, you said you started working with the U.S. Army's Ready and Resilient Performance Center program. I'm wondering what was the path to that, and what were some of the unique challenges you saw with soldiers when it came to mental resilience and performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, everybody's origin story is always interesting, right? I was a frustrated college athlete, to be honest with you. I felt like, I ended my college career leaving potential on the table, and I was determined to really kind of figure out how to help other people not have that same experience in some capacity or another. So even as a college athlete, I was introduced along the way to this new and emerging thing called sports psychology. And I felt like I had hit the jackpot. I did a couple of internships and determined man, this is awesome stuff. I was studying psychology at the time already and obviously competing as a college athlete. So through that process, realized I could really marry those two together. So went to grad school, and along the way, ran into some people at industry conferences and things like that were working with military. What are these people doing, man? How are you going to help these guys that are, serving our country, men and women serving our country? How are you going to help them with sports psychology training? Anyway, it just didn't make sense because I didn't know what I didn't know. And exploring a little bit over the next couple of years as a student, gave me the opportunity to ask a lot of dumb questions and maybe a few good ones along the way, and realized, actually, that sounds really awesome what you guys are doing over there. I think a lot of people come into the field of sport and performance psychology thinking, everybody obviously wants to work with people they see on TV and stuff like that. But, the reality is there's a lot of people who can benefit from some element of mental performance training. And the military was a great opportunity. I saw a lot of awesome folks that I looked up to gravitated in that direction. I thought, you know what, maybe I'll see if I can sneak in the door behind somebody and without anyone noticing. And anyhow, got the opportunity to join that program under different titles. It's, you know, gone through evolutions over the years as things tend to do. But back in 2010, really got to begin my journey working with the U.S. Army and really rolling up my sleeves and getting out into the dirt in the desert and later on more of the woods and the snow and the rain, as it turned out, and working with leaders and soldiers on the front lines of, you know, really what it looks like to perform under pressure.
So what were some of those unique challenges then that came with working with that group of individuals in particular?
Well, I think one challenge for me was I didn't understand, you know, the operating environment. So, you know, it was like learning a new language. There's acronyms for everything. Some of them actually make sense, some don't. And really figuring out how to connect at least what I thought I knew to their real world performance tasks. You know, the military kind of frames that as move, shoot, and communicate. And so how to frame the things that I understood from graduate school and working with athletes and translating that in a way that could be understood and relevant, contextually relevant to a military population was definitely a challenge for me personally. Some of the challenges for them, you know, there's just a lot of distractions. And being able to prioritize, being able to manage attention, being able to be confident in your training and trust yourself when it's all on the line is really important in that environment, which seems kind of obvious, I guess. But a lot of skill development. So continuing to help folks hone their skills. I talked to so many military leaders over the years that really just, you know, one of their biggest challenges was having enough training time to get people to a proficiency level that they needed to be at in order to have a strength of combat power when they deployed. And how do we maximize training time and kind of the role that I gravitated to over the years was helping them increase the efficiency of their training. Let's reduce repeated mistakes. Let's increase the level of proficiency more quickly so that you can maximize the training time you do have and increase the learning curve of those individuals in all manner of military operations, because each unit across the military has different tasks that they're responsible for. Some clear routes, some search for IEDs, some kick in doors and do things like that. Some people run finance and sit behind a desk most of the day. And so there's a lot of different mental performance challenges depending on what their role and occupational specialty is.
So you weren't just working with the guys who were kind of, you know, seeing all the action and stuff. Like you were working with this whole organization to optimize their cohesiveness.
Yeah, some more than others. I definitely spent a lot of time with scout troops. So those are kind of like the forward observers, if you will, in a way. As well as infantry units, which are more your traditional. You think about, you know, kicking down doors and taking out bad guys kind of stuff. We worked with military police. We worked with all kinds of different organizations. Air defense, you know, they're shooting rockets or shooting down rockets. You know, that's their mission. So a lot of different organizations across the military, which was awesome. And actually, to your point, I got the opportunity to work a lot on leadership development and culture. As you move up as a leader, your level of influence changes because now you're responsible for a much larger organization. As a platoon leader or a platoon sergeant, you're responsible for a group of about, average of 20 people, some more, some less, maybe 20 or 25 people. As a battalion commander or brigade commander, now you're in charge of hundreds of people. And that's a very different level of leadership and influence. And so at that point, you're really not talking about X's and O's anymore. It's like an NFL head coach these days. Most of them aren't really in the mix at that level of detail. That's delegated out to, your coordinators, position coaches, and stuff like that from a sports context. So when you're leading at a higher level, what tools are in your toolkit to cast a wider net and create a culture that's aligned with your vision, values, and standards of behavior that you need across your organization. So that was a lot of fun. We got to do that with a lot of different military organizations, including some government service organizations that really provide mostly just support, like ammunition, for example, or they provide like Army Material Command has all kinds of different organizations within it that supply, our front lines and training pipelines and things like that. And so getting to work with organizations like that are built of, made up of thousands of people, and how do you create culture at that level is a really interesting process.
Are there any experiences or stories that stick out in your mind from that part of your career?
Well, you think about, I guess the things that stick are maybe the few successes and the really dumb things you did along the way. It's a great question. One of the successes, we were working with an organization training folks to go to Ranger School, which is really the Army's premier leadership academy, if you will. That's non-academic in most ways. It's very field oriented. If you're really successful, it takes you about 3 months to get through that grind. It's made up of 3 phases. You traditionally don't get a lot of sleep. It's pretty tough. Environmental conditions. You've got to make some really interesting leadership decisions, and really get a group of people to come together that you don't really know until you get there. So I got to be involved in a preparatory program for that. And at the time we started, their graduation rate of the people that they sent to Ranger School, their graduation rate was about 33%, which is the Army average at the time. And over the course of about 18 months, we continued to chip away at that by providing some mental performance training. We worked with their leadership. Obviously, they upped their game as well. So, not taking credit, our organization couldn't by any means take credit for their successes over time. But over the course of about 18 months, they increased their graduation rate from 33% at the Army average, where everybody else was and stayed, to about 67%, which was double the Army average over that time period, which was fantastic, and raised a lot of eyebrows about what the heck are you guys doing over there. But a lot of great leaders putting in their time, energy, and effort into it. And then we provided some mental performance work to really target some of the areas where we saw people being unsuccessful or running into challenges that were preventing them from graduating that course. So that was a cool, success story from that time.
Yeah, that's a nice feather in the cap.
Right. It's always good to know when things work.
Yeah. Well, when it manifests as something concrete, rather than just a subjective experience, I think that's
right.
always rewarding.
That's right.
So how did that lead to you working with the Air Force fighter pilots?
Yeah, that's a great question. So over the course of, so I worked with the U.S. Army and Special Operations community for about 10 years. And over that time, a lot of leaders wanted proof. And what's really fun is that about every 18 months to 2 years, you have a new leader to prove it to. Because whatever proof you had 2 years ago isn't good enough for the new leader coming in. So everybody kind of wants to fact check a little bit, which I understand. But it just creates some interesting challenges for us. And so that kind of led me to explore more technology. And how do we integrate technology into what we're doing with mental performance training? And we had a great relationship with our installation command team. That was part of my role at the time, was to be kind of the senior advisor across the installation, across the division, to provide insights on how do we develop increased performance, leadership, resilience, those kinds of things. And we had some really interesting conversations about how can we do this better? How can we better validate what we're doing? Is it working? Is it assessment? Is it different tools we need to provide better training? And so that led us to develop what we named a mind gym. How do we train the brain in a way that we train our bodies? Everybody likes to talk about the brain being a muscle. Great. How do you train it, right? What do the reps and sets look like? What does that periodization process look like? And so we started down this road of bringing technology into that conversation from an assessment standpoint, but then also from a training standpoint, and looking at really how we can train what's now called like athlete cognition, which combines really sports vision training and how we're training the eyes and the way the visual system receives and processes information in order to think, decide, and react more quickly. That's a competitive edge right there. And perceptual cognitive training is part of that, kind of that same process. And so how do we train these things in a way that, for going back to those core soldiering tasks, that we can improve how soldiers move, shoot, and communicate? Because shooting was the most tangible performance part of that. We spent a lot of time on ranges and shoot houses and simulation environments to gather data and track performance. And also, how do we train these different skills in those kind of environments by integrating technology into that to improve overall operational performance?
And so you were part of an integrated human performance team with the Air Force, right?
With the Air Force, right. So actually that technology aspect and getting familiar and working with what I really call now neurocognitive training technologies is really what the Air Force was looking for. They needed somebody who could interface both kind of work through the man-machine interface, but also advise on what products are worth spending money on and which ones are a waste of time and which ones are going to be relevant to our performance population in terms of fighter pilot training, and which ones aren't, and how do we integrate those into our training flow so that it's efficient, because nobody has time to do extra stuff. And you see, I mean, that's true in a military context, it's true with athletes. Things can't be extra or supplemental. Nobody has time for that. So you've got to figure out, how do I integrate these things in? So the Air Force was looking for somebody with some experience in that realm, as well as having a background in sports psychology and mental performance. So fortunately, I fit the bill and got to jump in with this human performance team, which I thought was a great step in the right direction, just in terms of sports science and human performance in general. You see too many organizations have these siloed resources: strength and conditioning coaches, athletic trainers and physical therapists, sports science or your sports science analytics kind of folks, mental performance or mental health. And all these things kind of operate separately, like some kind of assembly line that we just walk high performers through this process, and everybody, they just pick up a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And at the other end, we spit out, boom, here we are, I have a Ferrari. But it doesn't really work that way. Those are what I would really refer to as multidisciplinary teams, which is great. Human performance resources working together in the same environment, but just because you coexist doesn't mean you're working together. And really what we were trying to build with the Air Force is an interdisciplinary human performance team that was very collaborative in nature and worked hand in hand with each other to better serve our fighter pilot community.
Right, because the brain is part of the body, and so you wouldn't train those.
As it turns out, yeah,
as it turns out, right?
There's a connection there.
People treat it so separately. They're like the mind-body connection. I'm like, well, the mind is the body, right? And the brain is the body. So it's doing.
Turns out the motor cortex that runs the whole body part, is in the brain, as it turns out. So it's that's a strong connection, and that goes back to what we were looking at before. We're just how do we actually train the brain as a muscle, and what do those sets and reps and periodization look like? And that's really what we started to do for the Air Force, and what I continue to do for clients now is, working with high performance training facilities and teams and organizations on how do you develop a program like this that works. And by works, I mean not only gets results, but also is efficient, effective, fits within their training environment, just within their day-to-day operation. And that's really important.
Yeah. So how does that design process of these cognitive performance training programs work? How do you go about that? Can you give me a glimpse into that?
That's the secret sauce, Colin. No. I think it kind of comes back really to where I see a number of organizations face some challenges there. Because what I often see are a few different things. One is where organizations, either they don't know where to start. That's kind of the first thing that often happens, is we just don't really know where to begin. Again, what technology to buy? What are the right training methodologies? What type of cognitive training? Because there's a lot of terms. If you even look in the literature, what do we mean by some of these things? And is that going to be relevant for our performance context? The other challenge I hear is organizations that are doing something, which is awesome, but maybe they're not targeting the right skills, or their athletes or their military operators aren't really using the training very much. And oftentimes it's because we're not targeting the right skills and there's no structure in place. And that kind of brings me to challenge 3 that I often hear, is that there's no systematic program, structures and processes to, like you wouldn't send an athlete to a strength coach that doesn't have a plan, right? And doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, you're not going to trust that strength coach. And really the same should be true in the world of cognitive performance. And so how do we go about building that process? Well, first of all, is identifying what are the cognitive demands that are relevant to your organization, to your population, to your athletes, to your operators. What are the demands that they have to deal with and navigate that are taxing their visual resources, their attentional resources, their physical resources? Because we need to know, what are we training for? And are those skills, those demands, the skills to meet those demands, are those skills trainable? Are they relevant to the performance context? Those are all key things. So do they matter? Is it trainable, and is it relevant to your performance context? So we go through this demands analysis process, identify our outcomes, and then we determine, if the organization is really looking to do design assessment and evaluation, progress monitoring for those things. What are the tools and systems we need to do that? And then what are the training mechanisms? Because you don't want to assess something that you're not even going to train. Although I see that happen. Well, what are the training methods? And again, tools, resources, technology, perhaps, that we need to train these skills over time. And from that, how often do we build that into the training process and sequencing? So is it something that we can build into day-to-day practice? Is it something we can build into their strength and conditioning training? Is it something that maybe needs to be separate, or it's tied into preventative work, or maybe it's tied into recovery? Again, it depends on what skills we're talking about and how we want to get after that. But that's kind of what that process starts to look like. And then depending on what kind of context we're going to integrate the training into, that's one example where I work with a lot of strength and conditioning coaches to develop an integrated mind-body training, as you said, right? Where we're integrating now physical training and cognitive training together, because there's so many benefits to that combined effort. As it turns out, the military has a term for this. It's called train how we fight. But so often we train physical and mental separate. But that's not a performance environment. The performance environment taxes both systems simultaneously. And if one gets depleted, it affects the other. Not just when I'm physically tired, that affects my mental performance because I make more mental mistakes, or I'm not as focused, I'm not as locked in, 100%. But if I'm mentally fatigued for a variety of reasons, that's going to affect my physical performance. And there's great research on that now to show that it starts to change our rate of perceived exertion, and we start to not try as hard, or we pull back the reins, we let off the throttle, or we just quit sooner, not because our body was worn out, but because mentally we were overtaxed. And so when we train those systems simultaneously, there's a lot to gain there in terms of, even in sports, like late game decision making and execution.
Yeah, you're kind of removing the bottlenecks, whatever those are, whether they're physical or mental.
And your training now more closely resembles the actual performance environment, preparing athletes and operators for those real world demands.
Do you ever get any pushback when you try to implement this stuff in organizations? Because I would imagine that in military organizations specifically, you'd run into maybe some older ideologies where people are like, man, you don't need this. Like, I'm just going to push through this. Like, how does that manifest? Does it?
Yeah, definitely. I think less so now than it used to be. That you mentioned earlier, what are some of the challenges of being able to speak the right language is really important, because if you can't contextualize how you're trying to help people, then it's really hard for them to wrap their mind around something that is new to them. And as you said, this is, integrating cognitive training, whether we're talking about developing routines and visualization and breathing exercises on more the mental performance side, or we're talking about developing the way that we see and process information to be able to make decisions faster on the battlefield or on the court, the field, the ice, whatever it might be. That's different to people. And, so being able to speak the language is really important and contextualize what is this training going to look like and how is it actually going to translate onto the field of play, if you will. That's a huge barrier. You definitely see some challenges there and some skeptics. I always invite people, hey, let's take it for a test drive, right? Let's just hop in, get behind the wheel. Let's see what happens. Because I've just, I've seen it work over and over again, and being able to speak to some of those experiences from the past, whether we're looking at research or data, even that I've been a part of collecting and studies I've been involved in, those certainly help. But a lot of times you just got to get in there and see it and put it into action. And that's really the best way, in my opinion, that I've seen to overcome some of the concerns or challenges or skepticism that people may have. Because it's definitely a new way of doing things, especially if you're talking about integrating like cognitive training into skill development, on field, on court type stuff, a day-to-day practice or military training as well.
What made you want to focus on this as your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm just naturally curious. And so, I want to know if what I'm doing actually works, I guess, is really what it comes down to, and be able to demonstrate to the people that I'm serving, hey, we can see progress here. There's a lot of power in being able for an individual to be able to see that they're making progress. I think that's just the way that we're wired as human beings when it comes to motivation. We want to see that we're getting better in some way, shape, or form. I mean, that's just in life, whether we're talking about fitness or my day-to-day habits or, am I drinking more water recently, whatever. We want to know whether we're making progress, and technology really provided an avenue to do that. And in my personal opinion, I feel like my field of sport and performance psychology is moving in this direction of being more data driven, being able to capture more information, and not just, I implement biofeedback and neurofeedback and perceptual cognitive training and sports vision elements. And all of those things really come together to be able to provide the individual with feedback. And we know that if we're going to get better at anything, the more immediate feedback we can get, the better. And being able to use something that gives you immediate data, feedback, even a score of some sort. We did this exercise and I got a 36. Okay, well, yesterday you got 34, and before that it was 32, and we're working up to be in the 50s. We're making progress, and I can demonstrate that to you, and you can feel that a little bit as well. Or using neurofeedback to show you, hey, you're using less cognitive resources to complete this task than you did a month ago. Same task, but now we're gaining cognitive efficiency because you're able to manage that cognitive load much better. And again, whether we're talking about fighter pilots or basketball players, that's huge. And we're processing information faster. We can see that. Well, man, you seem to be making better decisions at the plate. Yeah, because we've been training this, and you can see that over time. And then it's great to be able to show how that works. So I think that's how I ended up gravitating towards this neurocognitive technology area, or kind of niche, if you will, is because, it's a lot of fun too, don't get me wrong. But, there's this aspect of being able to demonstrate value to folks and through assessment, but also through the training process. And it makes mental training more hands-on. And I felt like that was something that had been missing.
And is that technology some of the stuff that you're using at the Excelling Edge now?
That's right. Yes, definitely.
So what was the inspiration behind starting the Excelling Edge? Was it sort of just that curiosity that led you to want to do that? Was it a natural next step?
I think it was a natural next step. I worked in government contracting for a long time, and it was hard to do much outside of that in the day-to-day. Just, sometimes it's early mornings, late nights, long hours, depending on the environment that I was in. And, I really wanted to be able to help on a broader spectrum of human performance. And also felt like over the years, been just blessed to be in opportunities to gain different experiences now that I see other human performance initiatives struggle with when it comes to integrating neurocognitive technology, but also working across disciplinary teams and those types of things. And so I felt like by creating the Excelling Edge gives us an opportunity or a broader platform now to work with training facilities or athletic teams and still support military units or military human performance teams in that context, and just be more of a resource for folks and provide kind of a more of a consultant perspective as opposed to necessarily being in the trenches day in and day out.
So if I were to fly out to Phoenix and I was to walk in your doors and say, Justin, I want you to help me perform better, where would we start? What does that process look like?
Yeah, great question. I would say perform better at what? Because the context matters significantly.
So I work in a cognitively demanding job. I'm running this podcast, right? So I'm trying to perform well at my job, which is fully remote. I work fully remote. And so I want to be able to get the most out of my hours and also be a great dad because I'm a dad, and also be a great partner to my, I'm getting married in July. So I'm about to be my wife.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Really exciting summer ahead. So kind of just like optimizing sort of, my performance, my time, within that context, that digital work context.
Yeah, that's huge. And so many people are in a similar boat now. I think, post-pandemic is part of that, but I think the world of work was already beginning to transition to some degree. Yeah, that's a great question. I think really looking at what are those areas that matter most? What are your cognitive demands that we really want to target? So it sounds like, just speaking broadly here, things like attention and being able to lock in and be efficient with your time, your time, energy, and your effort is huge. So, how can I get the right things done in an efficient amount of time so that I don't get caught up, just toiling away down rabbit trails on the internet, one YouTube video after another, or buried in email, those kinds of things, I think are some of the barriers that we deal with. And just there's so many distractions now with digital devices. Funny enough, because I work a lot with technology, but how a lot of those things, we don't necessarily set ourselves up for success. And so looking at how are you managing your attentional resources would be one key area. How are you able to lock in and manage your what we'll call stress level throughout a day or a week? How are you getting dialed in for those key performance moments for you? Whether those are podcast interviews like this, or it's a meeting, with a marketing organization or a product that you're working with, making sure that you're on your game. So those are some areas that we would look at to see which are the areas that matter most to you. How can we evaluate them? And let's get a training program in place to set you up for success.
Yeah, it's a great point, because I feel like there is sort of this kind of baseline level of attention where I kind of need to be in the flow and kind of moving from thing to thing to, do things efficiently. But then, like you said, there's these key moments where you have to be on. It has to be like mistake-free focus, where you really have to lock in for a short period. And the thing I've realized, I don't know if you've seen this as well, is that that's extremely draining. So you want to conserve that for when it matters most.
Actually, so there's, one term for what you're talking about is flow. There's a lot of great research. I think flow initially was this sort of nebulous, woo-woo kind of magical experience that maybe you happen to fall into on a random Thursday. But now there's so much research behind flow and our understanding, and it certainly continues to evolve, but understanding the neuroanatomy and the neurochemistry of flow has really enabled us to target some key things that can set ourselves up for more of a flow-like experience. And when we can start to set the conditions for that, we can optimize work, we can optimize productivity, we can optimize engagement. And there's pretty proven processes now that we can use to do exactly that help you do your job better in any workforce. So much time, I mean, there's great statistics on this. So much time is lost on disengaged employees that, I mean, whether our attention got stolen and, we're pulling in too many directions at once. And so we can't actually get work done, or we're not motivated in the right way to really step on the gas and finish the job. And a lot of that ties into how we can set ourselves up better to get into a flow-like experience. Is really, Cal Newport called it deep work, right? Where we really can get ourselves into this mental state to be at our best. And there's slightly different mental states depending on the type of work that you do. Is it very like detail-oriented, down and in kind of work, or are we doing creative up and out type of work? And the mental space for those things is a little bit different, and helping people understand what those differences are, but also, this is the important part, right? How do I get myself there? What are the tools and resources and habits and practices that I can use on a day-to-day basis to be better at what I do? And that is the fun stuff in the worlds that the arenas that I get to play in.
Do you guys do anything with neuro-linguistic programming?
Not specifically, not under those terms, neuro-linguistic programming, but a lot of what you're talking about there is from more of a sports psychology perspective. We call imagery or visualization quite similar, really. And how do we set ourselves up for success in that capacity? A lot of what we know from the research is what I call priming, right? How do we prime ourselves mentally and physically? We can use to set ourselves up for success, either to be at our best, and kind of see those peak experience moments before we get there, but also how we're going to overcome challenges and deal with difficult emotions, and being able to imagine, as some people say, in our mind's eye, what does that look and feel like? The term that I like to use in that when we're talking about that is making imagery or visualization an immersive experience. There's a reason that we like VR a whole lot better than black and white TV. And the more immersive that we can make those types of imagining experiences and make them realistic, the more benefit we're going to get out of them. And the research validates that.
Yeah, it's always amazing to me when I hear about what some of these like really high performing CEOs or like visionary entrepreneurs are doing. And it's like they're just visualizing things before they happen. And it sounds so they're like, oh, you're just thinking about what is happening. But it's like they're like obsessively every day visualizing what they want the future to look like. And then somehow that's kind of ingraining it into the nervous system with that mind muscle connection, right? There's kind of needs to be a synchronicity there.
Yeah, I tell athletes the body's going to try to execute whatever you imagine. And so if you're standing at the free throw line going, don't miss, you're more likely to imagine the ball bouncing off the rim. And then your body's like, okay, got it. And we miss that opportunity. We miss the shot. So again, going back to that mind-body connection, it's a very real thing that, what I like to do is just educate into people about how that mind-body connection works. Because if we can understand it, now we can learn to leverage it to our advantage.
So in your work across all these different fields, right? Business, sports, the military, what are some common patterns or challenges that you see just across all high achievers?
That's maybe a bit of a loaded question. I think everybody's insecure. Everybody's insecure. Whether you want to call it imposter syndrome, some environments I wouldn't go quite that far, but there's this skepticism about our own level of competency and proficiency and performance. We have this, what I call the WDFs. We have the worries and the doubts and the fears that most of the time, if we're lucky, they stay in the back of our mind. But sometimes they start to creep in and, in a moment of quiet before maybe a big moment or after something that didn't go according to plan, they get louder. And what we've got to learn to do is manage those more effectively. But I think everybody has some degree of insecurity about, do I have what it takes? Am I good enough? Am I prepared enough? Can I really come through in this moment or in this environment? And so helping people wrestle with that, I think, is really important. And that's a challenge that I see across the board. And I think, again, that's just part of our human wiring, to be questioning. It's not bad to ask questions. We just got to be careful what our answers are and how we manage those things, and how we engage them. Because sometimes if we engage those in the wrong way at the wrong time, that can increase our stress level or our anxiety, and we perform more poorly, and we create what we would call a self-fulfilling prophecy that doesn't go our way. And if we can learn to engage those worries, doubts, and fears in a more productive manner, again, in the right way at the right time, then we're going to set ourselves up to really be at our best when it matters most.
So I spent a little bit of time looking through your blog on your website, and one of your articles stood out to me as a parent, which I hadn't really heard a whole lot of other people talk about, which was don't praise results, right? Like praising effort.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. And I just wanted to know if you could kind of expand on that a little bit, because it's something that I think intuitively, like my fiance and I, like, yeah, we don't want to praise necessarily the outcome of something, because then it creates kind of that feedback loop that maybe isn't as healthy as it should be.
Yeah. I think that it's a delicate balance. The research on that kind of comes back to fixed and growth mindsets from Dr. Carol Dweck, who's I believe most recently at Stanford. But our research really showed just the feedback that we give shapes behavior in a pretty profound way, because it doesn't really just shape behavior, it shapes the belief system of the person that we're providing feedback to. And it highlights to them what's important. And if the outcome is what's most important, now I become just a performer, right? My job is to get results, and I'm going to be praised. I like that praise, right? As again, back to human motivation, we like to be praised and recognized. So what that starts to teach us is, in order to get that recognition, or in a more personal way, to receive someone's love, we have to perform to get that. And as a parent, even as a boss, a leader, a manager, that's not what we want. And that doesn't really set our folks up for success either. What we want to do is we want to praise the process, the skill, or the effort. What Carol Dweck called effective praise sets individuals up for success over time, so that now I have a process, not, hey, Justin, and you did great on that test, that math test that you had in school last week. Great job. Okay, now I'm like, okay, well, I guess I got to continue to get these A's, right, for anybody to notice. But instead, if you highlight, hey, I really noticed that you put a lot of study time in last week. You partnered up with your friend down the street there, and you guys really worked at it. I know that wasn't easy, but it looks like it really paid off for you. Okay, well, now it's a very different message. Now my understanding of how to be successful isn't just, hopefully I'm smart enough and I get the A, but now it's something that I actually have control over. So when I study and I ask questions and I work, maybe collaboratively with somebody else, that sets me up for success. Well, that's something that applies not just to my math test, but that's something that I can use, in lacrosse. That's something that I can use in my first job out of college or whatever. Those are repeatable processes now. And so I think, as a parent, a leader, a manager, a coach, we want to set people up for repeated success. And a great way to do that is to praise the process.
Yeah. Well, if you wanted to get the A every time, I mean, at some point you could just say, well, you know what? I'm just going to cheat off the guy next to me because I'll still get the A.
Right.
Versus actually studying hard. Because if the A is all that matters, well, whatever it takes to get the A.
Right.
Do you find that some of your work with people kind of involves undoing some of that conditioning that's happened to them, like
Absolutely.
Through results?
Absolutely. Because I see a lot of folks that have different questions around, just athletes that have had a coach that didn't praise the process, for example. And it was very much a hard-nosed, performance-driven approach. And I'm not opposed to having high standards or anything like that, by no means. But how we go about that has ramifications. And so sometimes, I'm working with athletes that have been in an environment that really was toxic, and helping them understand, hey, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be 100% all the time. And actually, that's really important, because if you don't get outside your comfort zone, you're not actually going to get better. If every day at practice, you're just trying to look like you are really, really good at what you do, you're not getting outside your comfort zone. You're not pushing your limits. You're not increasing, you're not maximizing your potential. And I know that's not what this coach wants. So we've got to undo some of those past conversations and belief systems a little bit, and just help individuals work through interrogating those things and saying, hey, like, is this really working for me? And those are some important conversations.
Yeah, you have to be willing to be bad at something.
Yeah, I mean, it's
tough for a while.
If it's not frustrating because we're working outside your comfort zone, if it's not a little bit frustrating, you're probably not getting better.
Yeah, last thing, I know we've talked about just like, working with CEOs, we've talked about elite athletes, we've talked about in the military, your work that you've done there, and at your center at the Excelling Age, which I'll include a link to for everybody listening in the description below. But as far as everyday people, whether they're like me, they work from home, or, maybe they're just in school, they're trying to do better in school, or maybe they're competing in sports, but they're sort of at an amateur level, or they're youth sports. Like, what's some practical advice that you can give to people who just want to perform a little bit better, or perform at their peak more often, just on an everyday basis?
It's a fantastic question, because whether we're trying to be a better athlete, a better parent, a better employee, a better manager, a better coach, there's always room for improvement. And I think really just starting with that as a basis is a great spot to be. And to optimize performance, again, it comes back to, what am I trying to be better at? Where do I need to be better? And there's so many really basic things that we can do to set ourselves up for success. And I mean, like, seriously basic, like exercise, kind of basic. When we exercise, that's going to help us manage our stress and emotions better. We're going to better communicate. We're going to better problem solve. We're going to be able to lock in the moment. And we're going to learn faster. Give me an environment where those things don't matter, because I can't think of one. And so just something as simple as regular exercise 3 times, even just 3 times a week for 30 to 45 minutes, just take a brisk walk, get outside, which, by the way, has additional benefits. Something as basic as that. Getting regular exercise is huge. Staying hydrated. I see too many adults that are underhydrated, and it starts to create problems. It affects our vision. It affects our cognitive capacity, how we think and make decisions, how we process information, and let alone our actual physical health. And now, well, guess what? It turns out you can't be really that good at your job if you're at home sick. So exercise and hydration are so huge. Nutrition certainly goes in line with that. What goes in comes out in different ways. And so, being cognizant of how we're fueling this machine we call a body and a brain is really important. Fun fact, actually, your brain consumes about 25% of the calories that you take in. What are you feeding it? So some basic things right there are great. Another area that I think is really huge is just getting morning sunlight, getting outside in the morning, taking in morning sunlight. We absorb more vitamin D through our eyes than we do our skin. And vitamin D, again, has so many ramifications for regulating our circadian rhythm and sleep, which is another huge fundamental here when we talk about human performance. But that one I feel like people kind of get, but doesn't mean we're good at it, or we just are aware of it. But getting that morning sunlight actually is going to help improve our sleep quality, and changes our circadian rhythm. Also, again, how we regulate our mood, our ability to think and pay attention in the moment is affected by that. Morning sunlight, vitamin D, there's a whole lot of good things that happen there. So those are maybe some non-tech types of things that help. Also, setting up some high performance routines, and you can take the last few things that I just talked about and put those into a high performance routine. How you start your day really matters. I love working with people to be intentional with how they start their day. It doesn't have to be extensive. It can be 15 or 20 minutes, but if we initiate the day how we want to, then we're less likely to be kind of consumed by whatever just hits us when we get out of bed in the morning. So developing a routine around that is really helpful. I think also developing some type of a breathing or a meditation or a mindfulness practice. There's great research in those areas. We can spend probably 3 more hours talking about different ways of doing that, but setting aside, actually some recent research that I saw just said even 5 minutes of breath work in a given day is helpful to regulate your stress level. Who couldn't use a little less stress in their life or be better prepared to handle the stress that we do encounter? Because, some of it's just unavoidable and things that happen unexpectedly and those kind of encounters. So setting up a breath practice, a meditation and mindfulness practice is a great place to start. You could start your day with it. I really like to use it as a transition between work and home life at the end of the day so that I can kind of decompress or just separate all. My brain's just been going and going and going most of the day, and great conversations and troubleshooting and working with coaches and all these kinds of things. Let me just kind of tone it down a little bit so then I can kind of clear the cache and lock back in and be present for my family as well. So those are a few things. Maybe they don't seem too sexy or they're not too technologically advanced. There's tools you can use to support that. But that's a great place to start.
And what does that intentional morning routine look like for you specifically?
Oh, great question. Nice. So I don't know. As I said earlier, maybe I'm a kind of systems and processes person, so it may not fit for everybody. But I start with a glass of water. Got to rehydrate from the night, just the night of sleep. Get the systems up and running again. Then I do some movement, stretching, or yoga, followed by sunlight. I get trying to practice what I preach there, get that morning sunlight in. And all of that happens within the first really 30 minutes or so. And then spend some time, just kind of some quiet time, praying and reading and those kind of things. And then it's breakfast with the family and we're off and running. On the work side, that really starts with setting the intention for the day. Okay, what are the tasks on the docket for today, and identifying. I really keep it to 2 or 3 core things. There may be other nice to haves, on the day, but if I can knock out 2 or 3 core things, and sometimes it's, hey, I'm going to be running a workshop all day. Okay, well, great. That's the day's event right there. Other times, it's setting those priorities again. That way, I can be intentional with how I'm using my time, energy, and effort, and be able to really dive into those. As you were saying earlier, Colin, like, I just need to block out some other stuff. I got to get really be able to lock in and focus on what I'm doing. And that's a great way to set the conditions for that. Is just identify what are the priorities and jump right in to those most important things when you're at your best. For me, that's in the morning. Other people that may be a little bit different, but for me, that morning time is really the time I'm going to be at my best.
And then you mentioned kind of transitioning from work, like after you've done those 2 or 3 things, into evening. Is there a specific way that you like to have your evenings structured so that you can springboard into the next day?
Yeah, not too much. I don't get quite as systematic about that because just with family life, each evening may look a little bit different. I try to incorporate some of the same things, like, for example, like, my phone's on do not disturb and that kind of thing in the evening. Turn the lights down about an hour before I want to be asleep. So some things like that to kind of set those conditions. But, there's a few too many unknowns in family life to be too regimental about it. But setting a few parameters in place has been helpful for sure.
Well, Justin, I appreciate your time. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, great question. Certainly check out our website at theexcellingedge.com. And you can find us on social media. Really, probably Instagram is maybe a great place to start with that. And you can find us on Instagram at Justin R. Foster.
Justin, I really appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you for all your wisdom. Thanks for taking the time. And I'll include the links for everybody listening. I'll include those links down in the description, or if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, make sure that you follow the podcast, leave a review, do all that fun stuff. And Justin, I hope to have you back at some point.
Yeah, it's been a blast, Colin. Thanks for having me on. I hope folks can take some of this and use it and unleash their potential.
Cool. All right, guys, this is Colin and Justin Foster signing out.
Well, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode, this conversation with Justin Foster. And if you did enjoy it, be sure to follow the podcast, maybe share it with a friend, and leave a review if you really like what you're seeing here. Hopefully 5 stars. If not, I'm open to all feedback. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, give it a like, give it a share. And if you're listening, just know that we also have a YouTube channel as well, and vice versa. If you're watching, we have a podcast. I like to post them in both places. People who like to watch, people who like to just listen. And so, I don't have any regular cadence, putting up these podcasts. I just like to have conversations when I feel like it's necessary, when it's convenient, when it works out. And so, just tune in, subscribe so that you can get, notifications and can get new content as it arrives. There's a few exciting things also happening in the background as well that you might want to know about, and so you want to stay updated on. One of the things is the website is getting a revamp. I'm bringing the website back. So you'll have some really interesting written content as well that you'll be able to subscribe to. There may be a newsletter coming at some point. We'll see. We'll see how it works out. But just know that in order to stay at the forefront of all that new information, if you do want to know about new videos, know about new podcasts, new stuff going on with the website, just anything that has to do with MindHive content in general, it'd be good for you to subscribe, follow the podcast, just anywhere you're consuming content. Just make sure to subscribe to it. And that is the end of my spiel. So I hope you have an amazing day. Take care. I'll see you next time.